Chapter 23. The army of Roderick advanced rapidly through the lovely country richly tinted by the rays of the southern sun. Nothing indeed could be more beautiful than the scene. Though spring was only just bursting from the icy chains of winter, vine-covered cottages peeped through the orange groves loaded with their fragrant flowers, whilst behind the dark foliage of the lofty palm trees gave depth and richness to the landscape. Innumerable flowers permeated the air, and the sky glowed with azure and gold. Under these circumstances, the advance of Roderick's army, though rapid, resembled rather the journey of a party of pleasure than a fatiguing and toilsome march. And when, just as the sun was setting, they approached a small village, Edric paused on the summit of a hill to survey the delighted admiration of the lovely scene. A white church peeped from between a thick cluster of trees, and romantic cottages covered with wild festoons and luxuriant plants were scattered about in intervals, while sitting before the doors were placed groups of peasant girls, singing patriotic airs on the mandolins or flutes, and others were dancing gaily beneath the shade of some widely spreading trees. Neat dresses of black serge fitted tightly to the shape of these girls, and displayed the graceful elegance of their figures to the utmost advantage. Their long dark hair was bound in a simple net, and their sparkling eyes beamed with animation and love, and whilst the clear dark complexion, well-proportioned forms, jet black hair, and alkaline noses of their male partners, still, notwithstanding the lapse of so many centuries, strongly marked their Moorish origin. Songs of joy and lively music swelled upon the gale, but those sounds of peace and happiness were soon changed to shrieks of terror, as the unfortunate peasants saw the army of Roderick wind through the trees, and they fled screaming for mercy, whilst all the little store of wealth fell an easy prey to the foe they left behind. Edric shuddered at the pillage that ensued, and warmly remonstrated with his friend. "My dear Edric," said Roderick, "these things are inevitable, though what you see here can give you but a very faint idea of the dreadful havoc and devastation of war. My soldiers destroy nothing, and generally even pay for what they take, but commonly in an enemy's country men burn what they cannot make use of, and treat the unfortunate inhabitants with the most appalling cruelty. However, these are not things we reason about." "I think not," returned Edric, and finding his remonstrances unavailing, he had the discretion not again to allude to the subject till the armies approached Seville. The first view of the splendid city, illumined by the glowing rays of the setting sun, struck our young philosopher most forcefully. "Oh, Roderick!" he cried, "look at that long line of sumptuous palaces, adorned with marble pillars, and the finest statues, and those lovely gardens, those bowers of roses, those crystal fountains, whose sparkling spray looks dazzling in the sunbeams." "Well," said Roderick, "I see them all, and more, the lofty spires of the town rising beyond, their gilded vanes glittering in the sun." "And can you look upon this fair scene," asked Edric, "and not feel compunction? Alas, alas, that the cruel hand of man should dare destroy so lovely a picture!" "My dear Edric," returned Roderick, smiling, "you would never do for a conqueror. If you make war a profession, glory must be your mistress, and to obtain her you must sacrifice all your better feelings. But, what is that? Look yonder, Edric." "I see nothing but a volume of fleecy smoke curling between the trees," said Edric, "which harmonizes well with the lovely scene around, and that scene of the grief and of war is destined soon to desolate. Oh, Roderick, can it be possible that you, whose kind and charitable nature would not crush the worm to death unnecessarily, should—" "They have fired the suburbs!" cried Roderick, interrupting him. And clapping spurs to his horse, he darted forward like an arrow discharged from a bow. His suspicions were correct. Light clouds of white vapor hung high in the clear blue heavens, whilst below, a thick yellow smoke mingled with flames spread wide ruin and devastation. Crackling pieces of wood, sparkling like a feu d'artifice, were thrown up with violence at intervals, and the scorching heat felt intolerable as sparks of showers and pieces of ignited matter rained thick and fast upon the plain. Edric and Roderick were on a gentle eminence when they first saw the city, and deceived by the remarkable optical delusion often observable for similar situations, they had even fancied that it was very near them. When they plunged into the valley, however, they soon discovered that this was very considerable extent, and the horses, weary with the toilsome march, with difficulty made their way through the thick underwood and tangled grass that every moment threatened to impede their progress. At length they entered into the mazes of wood that quite obscured the city from their sight, and when fair Seville again broke upon them, an opening in trees, she appeared one vast mass of flame. "Good heavens!" cried Edric. "Surely they will not burn the city? What a multitude of human beings will be sacrificed if they do!" "I hope they will not be so foolish," said Roderick. "Yet I own I fear— No, now," he cried, after a moment's pause. See, the smoke divides. As the wind bears the rolling volumes asunder, the city's walls still stand. No fire has yet touched the glory and the bulwark of the proud yet fair Seville." The glowing embers still cracked as they approached, and still threw up occasional showers of sparks, fearfully glaring amidst the darkness of the night, which now closed in upon them in the thick gloom very unusual to that climate. The flames had caught the bridge ere the army of Roderick reached the banks of the river, and the fiery bow, glowing through the surrounding darkness, looked like a fabled arch over which the Mohattans believe the souls of the dead are destined to escape to paradise. At length the army of Roderick found the progress stopped by the deep, rapid waters of the Guadalquivir, the black smoking remains of the bridge which had once stretched across the river seeming forbidden to further their progress. Magnificent palaces lay around them, crumbling into ruins, whilst their half-burnt roofs fell occasionally with a tremendous crash. Fearful indeed was the spectacle that presented itself, and the once superb suburbs seemed the very temple of desolation. Faces and statues lay overturned and blackened by the smoke. Majestic trees, scorched by the flames, and their shriveled leaves stripped from their weathered branches, stretched forth their bare arms forlorn and desolate, like bereaved mothers mourning over their murdered children. A chill, drizzling mist began to fall, and looking dreary and uncomfortable. Roderick stood upon the banks of the river, and marked its dark, rolling waters, in which the fire that still crept among the ruins saw on the other side reflected in its red-lurid glare. "We must pass this river," he said. "These Andalusians are too crafty to destroy their fine suburb, in itself a town, had not some impetuous reason urged them to do so. If they want to gain time, but we must show them that we dare brave the combined terrors of flames and water, and glory gives the word." "And what is this glory you pursue so madly?" cried Edric. "May not prudence be admitted to its counsel? And will it not be more certain if we wait till morning to seize it? The night is dark and gloomy. I think it forebodes a tempest, and at any rate it will be difficult to ford this black rolling stream in the obscurity. Tomorrow will the dawn effect a safe passage. Our troops will then be refreshed and rest, and we shall be ready to encounter the rigors of dangers that may oppose us." Roderick smiled sadly. "Tomorrow, Edric," said he, "it may be too late. Tomorrow the armies of our enemies may expect to advance upon us, either obtain possession of the town, or cut off our retreat. We have traitors amongst us, for even now secret of our movements have been. You see, the enemy has had notice of our approach." "Why should we pause?" cried Lord Arthur O'Neill, one of the Irish lords who had followed the sovereign to the field. "Your Majesty may confide in your soldiers. Tired! An Irishman knows not the meaning of the word. Shall the heroes of Burgos, Valladolid, and Salamanca complain of fatigue? Have you forgotten how they fought and conquered? Have you forgotten the proud day before Madrid, when a handful of Irish fought and defeated a whole legion of Spaniards? Can we not think of these things, and yet talk of fear? Oh, no, surely not. Surely if we, every warm drop of blood in our veins, every spark of enthusiasm in our hearts, would give to lie the assertion. Lead on, brave Roderick. Damp not the spirit of your troops by unnecessary delays, but lead us forward to victory." "Lead us to victory!" shouted the officers and the troops, and Roderick, animated by their cries, gave orders for an instant fording of the river. The evening had now quite closed in. Not a star broke in the thick, dull gray in the heavens, and the sky began to look dark and threatening. The lowering clouds grew gradually darker and darker, whilst a dusky veil seemed to fall over the distant turrets of the town, and to envelop them in gloom. The fire that still raged in the suburbs had now seized the ancient castle, and a thick yellow smoke burst from its embrasures. It seemed like a huge giant vomiting forth flames. In the meantime, heavy clouds that had gathered over their heads seemed big with destruction, and a low moaning sound was heard at the distance, as though the winds were sighing over the fate of the unhappy wretches, who were soon fall victims to their fury. The hollow murmuring continued. It grew gradually louder and louder, and at length burst with tremendous violence in the fearful blasts of the heads of the enemy. It was now as dark as night. The thunder rolled with awful grandeur. The rain descended in torrents, and the flashes of lightning showed the glimpses of pouring vengeance from the clouds, and the still smoking fragments of a ruined bridge. It seemed madness to attempt to pass into the river in such a moment, but the determined spirit of Roderick, when once resolved, was not easily to be shaken, and crying out, "Glory to Roderick and forever!" he attempted to plunge into the boiling flood. At this instant the heavens seemed to open, and a vivid ball of blue light fire dart from them. The lightning had struck a tree, beneath which the group of soldiers had taken shelter, splitting it asunder and scattering the branches in all directions, whilst the groans of the unhappy wretches, crushed by its fall, mingled horribly with the howling wind and crashing thunder. Nothing, however, could intimidate the daring spirit of Roderick, and calling upon his soldiers to follow him, he struck his spurs into Champion, his faithful barb, and the noble animal plunged with him into the stream. The river, swollen by the torrents of rain, now rushed along in roaring waves like the sea. Champion and the horses of those who had tried to follow the example of their sovereign were soon obliged to try to swim, and struggled in vain to reach the opposite shore. The impetuous current, however, swept them down the river, and soon the cries of the drowning men and the plunging of horses added fresh horror to the roar of the raging rivers. Fearful was the struggle. Still, after a few horrible moments of almost supernatural excursions, the storm partly ceased, and though the wind still continued to howl at intervals and the thunder to roll, the growl became fainter and fainter, and soon nothing was heard of the splashing of the waves and the struggles of the swimming animals who tried in vain to stem the boiling currents. Champion had made most valiant efforts to save his master, but he strove in vain, and he only floated upon the waves. No longer could he toss his head and proudly champ his bit. His strength was fast leaving him. His long, thick mane and heavy armor weighed him down. His feeble eyes, however, caught a glimpse of the opposite shore, and they almost reached it, and the noble animal, collecting all his strength for one attempt, sprang forward. But alas, his heart broke in the effort. His strength failed, the slippery clay slided from beneath his feet, and the lifeless body of poor Champion fell back into the river, dragging his illustrious master with him. Roderick was much too exhausted to swim, and encumbered by the dead body of his horse, he was fast sinking to rise no more, when a powerful arm caught hold of him. "Take this knife!" cried a voice that he knew was Edric's. "Disentangle yourself from the horse, and I will save you!" His words recalled the fleeting spirit of Roderick, and he grasped the knife and hastily cut asunder the cord that confined his cloak around his neck. It was his cloak that had become entangled with his saddle, and the moment it was released, the neck of Roderick it floated down the stream, and the body of poor Champion, whilst fainting the monarch was dragged on shore by his friend Edric. The storm had now entirely ceased, the water began to get more tranquil, and the moon, breaking from the clouds, had drifted rapidly across the skies, showing the opposite bank so plainly that the rest of the army passed with little difficulty. In the meantime, restoratives had been applied to Roderick, and he opened his eyes. A slight shudder, however, ran through his frame as he looked around, and heaving a deep sigh, he hastily reclosed them, as though he wished to shut out forever the recollection of what had just passed. It was but for an instant, however, that the manly mind of the Irish hero indulged in this overwhelming sorrow. The next, smiling, though mournfully, he took the hand of Edric, and looking at him with affection, he said, "I owe my life to you. God only knows whether the boon be worth the need for thanks, or whether you have not been cruel to my people in saving me. They have a small reason to wish to live, if I am often to be seized by such freaks as these. Good God! I shudder when I consider that the lives of several of my fellow creatures have been sacrificed to my misguided folly. Poor Champion, too." Drawing his hand across his eyes to wipe away his tears, and then again trying to smile, You will laugh at me, Edric, but you don't know how much I feel the loss of that horse. Poor fellow, how nobly he breasted the tide and struggled on, but he is gone, and it's no use thinking of him. And as he spoke, he resolutely started from his bed upon which he had been laid, and dashed again the tears from his eyes. I've other things to think of that are far more important than the poor champion, and yet, poor fellow, I can't forget his obedience to me that destroyed him. Poor fellow, he would have been sorry for him, Edric, if he had heard how deeply he sighed when we were in the middle of the water, and I forced him to go on. But I will think no more of him. Summon my officers, and let us hold a council to our future proceedings. The council was called, and it was soon ascertained that the army had sustained no other loss than poor Champion and a few horses, and about 8 or 10 of the king's bodyguard, who had thrown themselves into the river the moment they had seen their master do so. Roderick felt keenly the folly that had occasioned the loss of these brave men and animals, but as he was aware that he was now surrounded by soldiers and the allied Spaniards, then that was always necessary for a monarch to be seen great, whether he be so or not, if he wished to be obeyed. He had too much self-command to show any signs of weakness, and gave orders for the commencement of the siege of the town, with as much coolness as though he had merely quietly marched up to its wall. In the meantime, Dr. Entwerfen had safely floated over the stream, riding across one of the ammunition wagons, which were contrived of cork and supported by bladders, or rather balloons, filled with the gas upon each side, whilst the middle part, upon which the doctor rode, being nearly in the form of a barrel, the worthy gentleman had formed no bad representation of Bacchus as he swam merrily across, for the learned doctor, having wisely considered how much interest in science would suffer if any accident befall his precious person, had waited till the river was as smooth as glass before he would venture to traverse it. It was perhaps also well for Roderick that he now found himself upon the theatre of war, and that he had orders to give, decisions to make, in short, that he had sufficient to occupy his mind, and prevent its dwelling upon the unpleasant circumstances that had just passed. Occupation, indeed, is the only sure remedy for grief. The consolations of friends and hopes of religion may do much, but the constant employment is the most effectual medicine for woe that the skill of man has yet able to discover. Roderick now enjoyed the benefit of his invaluable panacea to the fullest extent, for he had much to do. Notwithstanding all their affection for him, his army could not conceal from themselves that he had sacrificed several valuable lives unnecessarily by his rashness, and their confidence in his prudence was proportionally diminished. Roderick saw, and was mortified by this, the more so as he felt it was occasioned by his own folly, and he struggled to do something to retrieve the confidence he had lost. There is, perhaps, no situation more painful to a noble, high-spirited man than the consciousness of error, and the feeling that Roderick upon his occasion were an ample penance of his faults. During the whole of the passage of the river, and the encampment of the army upon the opposite side, under the very walls of the city, not a single soldier of the enemy had been seen, but when that was completed, the harassed host of Irish had stretched their weary limbs upon the earth, to seek a few moments' repose before the attack that was ordered at daybreak. Lights could plainly be seen moving to and fro in the city, and the heavy tramp of the soldiers heard as they prepared the walls. All now was still. A calm seemed to be succeeded a mighty tempest. A tent had been erected for Roderick and his chief officers, and there the monarch now sat gloomily musing, whilst his officers were scattered in various attitudes of repose and thoughts around him. Alexis, the Greek page, who had with difficulty passed the river, lay at his feet. At length all slept but Edric and Roderick. After a long pause, the Irish hero looked to his friend, and seeing him gazing at him with a look of tenderest concern, "Edric," he said, "I suffocate here. Will you walk forth?" Edric willingly consented, and they sallied from the tent. The moon now shone brightly, and the night was calm and still. They walked towards the banks of the river. Those waters which so lately had raged like a roaring lion seemed to devour, now rippled gently along, dancing in the sunbeams, and seeming almost to smile in mischief at what they had done. Roderick could not bear the sight. Remorse for his impudence struck like a barbed arrow through his heart, and he hastily turned away. He now looked at the scene that lay before him towards the town. The moon shone brightly upon the tents of his soldiers, which contrasted strongly with the black and disfigured ruins of the suburb, amongst which they had been hastily pitched. Whilst the lights of the city, seen only from the summit of the walls, made it look like an eagle's nest suspended between heaven and earth. Roderick grasped Eric's hand. "Calm now," he cried. "How peaceful seems the scene before us! Alas, how different from what you lately. But, what's that?" he exclaimed, suddenly interrupting himself. "Surely I heard a groan." Edric listened, and distinctly heard the feeble moaning of a human voice. Neither Roderick nor himself uttered a syllable, but both darted to the spots from whence the sound proceeded. Just at the bend of the river, surrounded by lofty trees, now scorched and half destroyed by the fire, stood the mansion de plaisance of one of the Spanish nobles. It had been built in the Italian style. Hedges of myrtle and pomegranates had bloomed in the garden, and a raised terrace now surrounded the house, ornamented with statues. Now, however, the terrace was covered with fallen pillars and broken vases. Ruin and desolation spread around. The trellis work, against which different creeping shrubs had been trained, hung in wild disorder, torn from the walls and crushing with its weight the shrubs to which it had once served as supports. Edric and Roderick entered the dwelling, for the cry seemed to proceed from its ruins. With hasty steps they traversed the deserted chambers, in which the magnificent tapestry hung in tatters on the wall, while shattered remnants of valuable pictures and shivered mirrors showed the grandeur that had once been there. All now, however, was desolation. The gilded walls and ceilings looked black with smoke, and the splendid furniture lay half burnt and half destroyed upon the ground. Roderick and Edric, however, did not stop long to survey the misery around them, for they hastily hurried towards the place from which the cries had proceeded. As they approached, they found there was a sense of a female voice that had attracted them, and advanced a few steps further, they beheld a sight that filled them with pity. Beneath the fallen column, in the ruins of which she was so entangled she could not move, lay, or rather stooped, a beautiful female, bending over an apparently lifeless body of an old man, whose fine features and venerable appearance were sufficient of themselves to create deep interest on his behalf, but which interest was terribly increased by the evident anxiety painted upon the beautiful face of the female. "Oh, heavens!" cried she, as soon as they approached. "If you have any mercy or Christian charity in your disposition, secure this old man. The cruel wretches have left him here to perish miserably. Though we are strangers, we are human beings, and have committed no crime." By this time, Edric and Roderick had arrived near enough to draw her from the column, when they perceived, to their infinite terror, that her arm was broken, and that she was otherwise seriously hurt. "Oh, think not of me," cried she, finding they wished to scour her before they attended the old man, who appeared to be dead. "Save my father. I'm quite well. Can I help you?" And heedless to her own pain, the heroic girl assisted in dragging her father from his dangerous situation. "I fear he is dead," whispered Roderick. "Oh, say not so," shrieked Pauline, for that was her name. He shall recover. Give him air," continued she, endeavoring with one trembling hand to use which she enabled her to unfasten his collar. Edric gazed at her with admiration, and struck with her filial piety and generous self-forgiveness, he felt an interest for her that he had never before experienced for a woman. He assisted her pious cares, and finding the old man still insensible, he bore him in his arms to the banks of the river, and sprinkled him with its waters. Whilst he was thus engaged, a little fat-stocked Entwolfen, quite out of breath with his exertions, came puffing in something between a trot and a run. "Oh, Edric, my dear!" he cried, gasping for breath. "I've found you, but hey, Eddie, what's this matter? You haven't been killing anybody, have you?" "Doctor," exclaimed Edric, "I am rejoiced to see you. This gentleman has been hurt by some falling ruins. Will you bleed him?" The doctor had studied surgery in his youth, and had since practised frequently for charity, and being in all things in which his particular foibles were not concerned, a man of sense and feeling. He instantly comprehended the importance of the case, and drawing forth his lancet, after having first buried and bound up the arm of his patient, he bled him. At first the doctor dropped slowly, drop by drop, but it soon began to flow more freely, And then the patient, heaving a deep sigh, opened his eyes. Pauline had been bending over her father with an intenseness of an anxiety that represented every personal feeling, but the moment she heard him sigh, the unnatural strength that had supported her gave way. Nature could bear no more, and she fell senseless to the ground. Everyone flew to her assistance, and Dr. Entwerp in particular was quite in agony. "Dear pretty creature," he cried, pushing his wig on the side, and hurried to raise her up. "Pretty dear, I do declare the arm is broken, and you should shoulder dreadfully lacerated. Poor thing, I wonder how she could contrive to hold up so long." "It is wonderful," repeated Edric. "It is the triumph of mental energy over bodily suffering." "See, she opens her eyes, she survives," exclaimed Roderick. "Had I not better return to my tent for assistance?" "There are some soldiers just there," replied the doctor, pointing to a group of men a few paces distant. They came with me to protect me, but I outran them when I saw Edric." The soldiers soon formed a litter, upon which the M. de Mallet, for the name of the old man, and his daughter were conveyed to the tent of Roderick, where proper surgical aid was afforded them. And whilst they were recovering from the injuries they had received, we will take the opportunity of informing our readers that the circumstances had placed them in so unpleasant a situation. M. de Mallet was a Swiss noble, and upon the usurpation of the despot of Switzerland, he had vehemently defended the liberty of his country. The tyrant had imprisoned him, and he had with difficulty made his escape, followed only by his daughter, who was devotedly attached to him, and who, in all his dangers, had never quitted his side. She had lost her mother in her earliest youth, and since that period all her thoughts and cares had been devoted to her father. To comfort him, he had formed his sole occupation of her life. The self was quite forgotten in her anxiety for his welfare. After escaping from Switzerland, they had taken refuge in Spain, flattering themselves that, as it was a free country, there they should be safe and happy. But alas, they soon found the charms of freedom were more ideal than real, and M. de Mallet, though he had been an enthusiast for liberty under the despotic government of Switzerland, found the sweets of freedom not so great as he had imagined amongst the republicans of Spain, and the pride of the nobles and the conceited ignorance of the insubordination of the people being, as he found by sad experience, things much more agreeable to talk than to endure. In Switzerland he had called the one proud independence, and the other manly daring, but now he discovers nobles and democratic chiefs can be tyrants as well as kings, and that the mob is a many-headed monster most exceedingly difficult to manage. At first, M. de Mallet and his daughter were rapturously received in Spain. No human beings had been more interesting. Plazas filled the air when they appeared, addresses were presented to them from all quarters, and people crowded to see them. The Spanish nobles vied with each other in offering them an asylum. Oh, this was very fine, but unfortunately it was too charming to be lasting. As M. de Mallet and his lovely daughter had seen often, congratulated and condoled with, there was nothing now to be done, and the enthusiasm of the Spaniards began rapidly to abate. In the first moments of triumph, M. de Mallet was blindly believed everything the people had advanced, and had fancied himself, really as they called him, a hero and a martyr. He thus felt sensible to change the feeling they soon envied. He became disgusted with a people so fickle, and being too candid to conceal his sentiments, he suffered the Spaniards to perceive his disgust. The total alienation of the remaining interests they felt for him was the natural consequence. In the heat of enthusiasm, M. de Mallet had accepted freely the offer of a Spanish nobleman to take his house as home, but with the usual tenacity of generous mind in the state of dependence, as soon as he fancied he saw a coldness on the part of his host, he left him instantly and hastened to the house of another, who had been still more warm in his offers of friendship. He, too, soon became cold, and M. de Mallet, like the hare with many friends, though overloaded with professions, found himself completely desolate when he really wanted perfection. M. de Mallet had provided no funds when he left his native country, and his estates having been confiscated, he was thus thrown entirely upon the bounty of strangers. Too high-minded to endure dependence, and too proud to humble himself to labor, M. de Mallet had solicited and obtained promise of a post in the Spanish army, and the directors of the government having promoted him in a place of garrison at Seville, he had proceeded a few weeks before to the house of the Duke of Sidonia. the governor of that city, for the purpose of taking possession. The Duke, however, received him coldly, amusing him with procrastinating promises, till M. de Mallet found too late he had been duped by the directors, who, to rid themselves of his improprieties, had sent him to Seville, merely on account to distance him from Madrid, and the difficulty he would have returning to torment him, instead of having any real intention of complying to his wishes. Indignant of the treatment he had met with, M. de Mallet expostulated warmly with the Duke, and the violence of his feelings produced an apoplectic seizure. The Duke, though indifferent to the suit of M. de Mallet, did not destitute the common feelings of humanity he had with him, therefore carried him to a chamber where proper surgical assistance was afforded him. The scene took place in the Duke's country seat, upon the banks of the river, and M. de Mallet had remained there till, aided by a strong constitution and the vigilant attention of his daughter, he was fast recovering. When, however, intelligence being received from the rapid approach of the army of Roderick, the Duke ordered the suburbs to be burnt, including his country house, and unfortunate guests had entirely escaped his recollection. The Spaniards appointed to destroy the suburbs, having performed their task with the utmost barbarity, tearing to pieces and destroying what they could not burn, the servants had flown at their approach, entirely forgetting M. de Mallet and his daughter, who, being a distant quarter of the mansion, knew nothing of what was passing until they were roused to the sense of the situation by flames attacking their apartment. With piercing screams, Pauline succeeded in rousing her father and forcing him from the chamber, but they knew not where to fly. The crackling flames seemed to pursue them wherever they went, and the falling timbers threatened every instant to destroy them. At last they reached the hall, and Pauline's beautiful features beamed with the joy of approaching deliverance, when the tottering roof gave way, rocking a few moments in fearful cracking noise, and then falling with a tremendous crash. Pauline saw it coming, and there was not time to escape. Uttering a faint cry, she threw herself before her father, striving to shield him with her delicate body from the coming danger. Feeble, however, would have been provided this slight and fragile barrier to ward off the impending peril, had not, fortunately, one of the descending rafters stuck between the projecting pillar, thus forming a kind of arch which served to protect them from farther injury, the falling of the roof having also nearly extinguished the fire. Pauline's arm had been broken with the blow, and her shoulder dreadfully lacerated, yet still the heroic girl supported herself, and sustaining with her remaining arm the apparent lifeless body of her father, who, stunned with so many misfortunes, lay insensible at her feet, she endeavored by her cries to draw the attention of someone on the spot, and as she found her father and herself were so entangled in the ruins that it was impossible they could be extricated without powerful assistance. The keenest interest was excited by Pauline and her father in the breasts of Edric and Roderick, but powerful as it was destined soon to give way to more painful sensations, for scarcely had they been removed to the tent, when Roderick, perceiving the first feeble tints of day streak in the horizon, gave orders for the assault. The city was strongly fortified, and even where the ancient bulwarks had decayed, the governor had hastily supplied their place with wood so skilfully painted to resemble stone, so quite to deceive the eyes of his opponents. 30 towers were ranged at intervals along the formidable-looking walls, and on one side appeared a citadel strongly garrisoned, which commanded the space between the river and the city, where the army of Roderick was now encamped, and which was aided by a kind of ditch which served occasionally as a covered way. The sun now rose in all its splendor, spreading its rich tints of gold and purple over the scene, and sweeping away before it mists of the morning. Soon, however, with its brilliancy to be obscured by the savage rage of man to deface the beauty of nature, soon did roaring cannon and flashing weapons imitate the content of the elements, and soon did the gashed and bleeding forms of the assailants strew the ground, rendered slippery by their blood. The besieged defended themselves vigorously. 3 times did Roderick and his soldiers attempt to scale the walls, and 3 times were they repulsed. But at length a breach was made, and Roderick, transported with joy, threw himself into it, shouting to his soldiers to follow him. They obeyed, and the siege would have been at once terminated, but not a cloud of dust, rising in long black columns in the distance, through which the reflection of arms shone dazzling in the sun, gave new spirits to the besieged, and discouraged the besiegers. Deep masses, half hidden by this heavy cloud, and appearing only more vast by the obscurity thrown over them, advanced rapidly, seeming to come on with the mighty force of a raging sea when it rushes along with irresistible force, and sweeps before her the thing that dare oppose its fury. The garrison of the town, animated at the sight, rallied their half-exhausted forces and drove back the assailants with such carnage that the line of their retreat was long marked with a long stream of blood and expired bodies. Roderick, for the first time in his life, refrained from renewing an attack, for, as he feared being surrounded, he determined to draw off his forces and to give battle to the combined French and Spanish army that was now fast approaching.